If you're looking for a community to accompany you in your leadership journey, you should join our Savvy Supervisors Facebook group. Insights and videos, supports, great group discussions, and weekly themes to help you hone your leadership skills, all for free. You can find it at savvysupervisors.com. That will take you directly to the Facebook page. And if you're interested in finding out more about our supervisory leadership course, which is our signature course and has been used with over 100 companies with amazing results, you can check that out at supervisoryleadership.co. That's supervisoryleadership.co. Welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. My guest today is Linda Crockett, who is the founder and CEO of Alberta Bullying Research, Resources and Recovery Centre. And she goes all over Canada, maybe even North America, teaching and coaching and helping people to identify bullying issues in the workplace and then solving them, which is something we really desperately need in the world. So it's really contributing to making the world a better place. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She is a psychological harassment specialist and trauma therapist. And she is the founder of the very first resource in Canada, which was designed to provide specific services to organizations, employees, and individuals about eliminating bullying in the workplace. From needs assessments, consultations, training, mentoring, research, coaching, through to short or long-term counseling, Linda is a highly trained and experienced professional who collaborates with qualified associates to offer tools for prevention, intervention, and recovery options. Linda's goal is to ensure psychological safety and address psychological injuries in the workplace. So that's a very noble and high-minded goal. Tell me about yourself and why you decided to name your company what you decided to name it.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you for having me here today. A little bit more about myself. I'm a Scottish-born, Canadian-raised, a wife of an amazing husband and mother and grandma. I'm also the founder, as you said, about this resource center, and I have 32 years of experience in my profession of social work. Currently, I'm in private practice as a trauma therapist. I'm a workplace consultant, coach, trainer, and I specialize in this area of psychological harassment or violence.
How did you get started in that? I'm really curious about it.
Well, I hit rock bottom. That's the bottom line. I hit rock bottom between 2008 and 2010. I didn't realize what I was going through at the time, but I knew that someone needed to prepare for what was coming to Alberta. That would mean there was going to be a time in Alberta when authorities would finally realize that this treatment in the workplace was illegal. Mm-hmm. So in 2010, I took all my skills in social work, my knowledge, my work experience, and I completed a master's degree specializing in this area. I created a center that would open doors to research, to resources, and to recovery options, because that's what's going to be needed for Albertans. I advocated for changes in our legislation. I met with MLAs, MPs, we did petitions, and eventually, with the help of many others doing this work, we now have this as a law.
You took something that was your own personal challenge and you turned it into a success story, basically, and a resource center, and you upskilled so that you could help other people to deal with that, so that wouldn't happen to them what happened to you, right?
Well, at the time, I had 22 years of social work at that time when I hit rock bottom. And I walked many people through all the systems that, insurance systems, unions, legal systems, mental health systems. I walked many families through these systems, whether it was domestic violence, sexual assault, mental health, poverty, addictions. I had my hands in those issues for 22 years. I had all that experience. But yet at 22 years, I hit rock bottom. And because no one ever taught about psychological harassment in the workplace, we didn't have a language to identify the signs. We also didn't have a language to speak about it. So if nobody was speaking about it, just like domestic violence and sexual assault, it was a form of shame that I suffered because I was supposed to know better. With my experience, I trained investigators in the complex issues of child abuse and addictions and all these areas, yet I could not identify what was happening to me. So I went into silence, I went into isolation because I was so ashamed that I should have known better. I should have seen the signs.
When you think about it, doctors have the highest suicide rate. They can't. It's like the physician heal thyself thing.
There you go.
You can't see your own.
No, you can't. And then there's a shame, like a policeman who finds out his son was arrested, or a doctor who can't cure their child's cancer, or that kind of thing. It was a social worker can't even get this. I felt that debilitating shame from that. But I went searching for recovery. I went searching for justice. I went searching for answers. And there was nothing in Alberta. There was nothing that I could find to help me. I went to different therapists, and they actually made me worse because they really didn't understand. Nobody got it. So I knew because of my work experience what to do for my recovery. I spent time in recovery. And that's when I went and got my master's degree and realized I needed to create a center that would touch on all these areas that people would need. And eventually we would get a law. And when that law came, which it did last year, June 1st last year, we would have a resource center where people could go for advocacy, for coaching, for counseling, for training. But first I would have to teach about it, and I would have to give people a language. I would have to help people identify it, because it's so complex, Marie. It's happening right in front of our faces. It's so normalized and so insidious. We're so used to it. It's, workplace bullying, for example, has really changed. It's not the same as what our grandparents went through, great-grandparents went through. Today, it's highly complex. It's very sophisticated. We're far more intelligent in society today. We can use better skills to hide it behind closed doors. But we also have the internet now. And I call the internet an abyss of weaponry if we want to hurt somebody. So the skills of doing any harm in the workplace, again, workplace bullying is primarily psychological abuse. So it's not it's not physical aggression or verbal, although it does exist. It is far harder to identify. We need our investigators trained in trauma interviewing skills. We need our mediators trained. We need our therapists trained. We need our leaders trained highly. We need our leaders trained, and we need them to be very cohesive in their stand to remove zero and to practice zero tolerance in their workplace.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good story and a really good explanation, Linda. I was thinking, that you have resilience, courage, foresight. You're organized and planned, right? That's all those qualities that you needed to be able to take something that was very traumatizing for you and move it into something that became your strength. So are there some incidents from your childhood that might have led you to the development of those qualities? Can you think of a couple that just stood out for you?
Well, I'm afraid I didn't have a really inspiring, successful childhood to share. And if you listen to many people who've turned their experiences into ways of helping other people, you'll find that they have shared some pain in their lives too. And when I came to Canada, I was very young. So I grew up without cousins and aunties and uncles and grandparents for role models. We had our small family, and that was it. And what that meant was I had a mother who had suffered a mental illness. She was very depressed. She had anxiety, and she suffered unresolved grief, layers of unresolved grief. And I would have to say that eventually that did develop into alcoholism. And though she didn't drink for very long, she didn't get help in her sobriety either. So that meant that she was a very unhappy person. And that unhappiness really impacted my life. She wasn't available for her children. And some of us took that in a bit deeper than others. And myself being a social worker by nature, I took that in very deeply. But what that did for me was it gave me a drive, and it gave me a determination that I was not going to be like that I was not going to hide in my fears. I was not going to be hostage to my fears. And it really challenged me to be, I guess in the earlier years, not healthy, not like my mother. But what that did was it made me try things. It made me try things I would never try. I had to push myself and challenge myself. And there was this unshakable, determinate stubbornness, I guess, that I was going to do better. As I matured and I healed, I realized that's what made me who I am today.
It was a gift, really.
Through all that.
A gift
and there
in
was
disguise.
A lot of gifts. Yeah, there were a lot of gifts. But I also came to heal and realize that there was a lot of goodness in my mom. I could forgive and I could accept that, hey, she was really witty. She had fast and quick humor, and she was really comfortable in socializing with people. So I could adapt that part of her as part of who I would be as a presenter. And I like that part about my style today. I can channel my mom when I need to, when I feel a bit shy. But the other part of that was my dad. He was a gentle I would say giant, but he's a very short Scotsman, but he was a giant in his nature. And he was very charming and very kind and very genuine. And he had integrity in his work, and coming to Canada, he had to feed 5 kids. He worked hard, but he had integrity in his work, and he was an honorable man, and people really, gravitated to him. He was also a great sense of humor. I love to listen to his accent, but there was parts of him I channeled too. He's also a Mason. So he had very strong values and spiritual values that I really sponged up. So I could combine those 2 leaders in my life, the good, the bad, the ugly, and really kind of hone into who I was going to be, what I could pick and choose, and who's me as a leader.
So was your dad a singer too? So many Scotsmen are great singers.
Well, after a few scotches, everybody can be a good singer. So although he would try to imitate Louis Armstrong, and that's probably my favorite song today, listening to him in A Wonderful World.
No kidding.
When I'm happy, I'll sing that too, and none of us can do it. But, my mom could sing too after a few drinks, and good memories there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Really, people don't develop leadership skills through the things that they do well. They develop management skills and self-efficacy skills through that. But they develop leadership skills through overcoming obstacles and reflecting on how they can take trauma and transform it to post-traumatic transformation, really. Thanks for sharing that. And I think many people identify with that. It's either in their immediate family or very close, because we have a very dysfunctional world. So it helps for people to hear those stories. So from the different groups you were born into, because the groups you're born into affect very much how you see the world. So from those groups that you're born into, which would you say has influenced your sense of culture, your sense of self, your sense of capacity to take on projects and push them forward?
I would have to say that the profession of social work is where I was most influenced personally and professionally as a leader on the topic that I specialize in today. It's about looking through life as a lens of social justice, holistic perspectives on everything that I do. Systems theory is part of who I am, and also client-centered and strength-based perspectives. That's where I come from. The fact that it offers me a wide range of options and resources and skills and opportunities and solutions as a social worker, it means that I can apply that to all walks of life. Giving a voice to those who are silenced, giving solutions to those who are hopeless, and knowing that all things in life are not black and white. This has influenced me to open my mind, to enhance my skills and expand my skills and challenge myself daily, and to truly understand who I am. So I can accept my humanness, find my place of being good enough, and I needed to feel that this open space of opportunity and answers and options, because for me that means change. That means growth, that nothing is really stuck, that we're not limited. That's the part that's influenced my life the most.
Great example of how a group that you chose became really essential to who you are. And I would say that most adults have that sense of profession. If it's something they really feel that it's a mission, it really helps to shape them. But there are other influences in your childhood and early adulthood before you became a supervisor that have to do with being in Canada, being in Alberta. It could be the religion that your family followed or didn't follow, but had some values attached to. It could be the immediate family environment, or it could be even thinking about coming from a Scottish background could also be that. Like my mother-in-law was born in Canada, but her parents were both immigrants from France. And for her formative, really, culture was the sense that she belonged to a greater family from France. Like that influenced her more than anything, right? Does any of that spark an idea for you?
Yeah, it does. There's many. Coming from Scotland, I have to say that as so young, living in Canada, I didn't know where I belonged because I wasn't quite Canadian and I wasn't quite Scottish. Being so young, I lived in a home of parents and older siblings that were full-blown, grew up in Scotland. I didn't. So I'm in this fence of, well, do I belong in Scotland? Do I belong in Canada? I have this weird accent. I'm getting teased for it. But if I go home and speak with any kind of Canadian, I get teased for that. I get teased at school for Scottish. So I could never really fit in and to figure out where I was. And that's continued throughout my life until my 40s when I had to accept one way or another. I was very detached from my family in Scotland. So there was always that trying to figure out, who am I then? Another part of being Scottish, I was raised in a family that had a battle between Protestant and Catholic. And that was really real in my life. Even though I'm in Canada, it was still in my home. And up until I was probably in my 20s, I was forbidden to speak to anyone that was Catholic. If you can imagine, I don't hear too many people share that, but if I spoke about, I want that little cross, that looks really cute, I want to wear a chain with a cross, I'd get slapped across the face. I remember being 11 and saying, I want to be a nun when I grow up. I was slapped across the face. I thought a boy was cute when I was 13, but he was Catholic, and I was slapped across the face. So, I was not allowed to have anything to do with Catholic. And, in my 30s or whatever, my dad would apologize to me for all of that. That was a level of ignorance. That was something he was raised for, and that toxic poison came here to his children. But we broke that cycle in my generation. I remember at 22 deciding I needed to know why I was afraid of Catholic people. I was afraid, but nothing in my brain was giving me rational, what was rational about that? So I went up to a Catholic church. I stood in the front foyer and I shook, but I knew it was unrealistic. And I forced myself to challenge this body memory of fear that made no sense. And of course we can laugh about it now, but that was really serious for me growing up, and it really influenced me.
I actually really identify with that because
Yeah.
I was on the other side. So my parents were saying, don't talk to the Protestants, right? We were the only Catholic on the block. Everybody else were Protestants. And it was like I had this irrational fear of Protestants. And I went to Protestant churches and attended the services so I could get over it. So I know exactly.
That's amazing, hey? You and I probably had stories of our uncles getting beaten up in bars, and I had a cousin that had his back broken in an alley between the battle of, Catholic and Protestant. And you grow up with these stories that influence you.
No, you had that for sure. That's from Ireland and Scotland. That's just really very real. In our family from Eastern Europe, it wasn't the same thing. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. And that is actually a very strong influence, the fear of the other, right? And the other can be anywhere and anyone. And if we don't have one, we make one up.
Like you, I didn't want to keep that. I didn't want to hold on to that. It didn't make sense to me.
That was not the way to live in the world with the human race, I thought.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's still influencing all the cultures around us today. I had a man come to me and say, I'm a bully and I don't want to be a bully anymore. And I said, how does the bullying show up in your life? He says, well, with my wife and with my family, because I hang around with men in my culture that treat their wives badly and bully them and are abrasive and horrible to them. And he says, but if I stop being that way, I won't belong to this group anymore. My culture says I'm supposed to treat women badly. And I said, you need to go to your leader and find out if that's true, because I don't believe that. And so he did go to his leader and found out that no, there was no truth to abusing women. It was this group of men that he belonged to.
Within the group, that's like a subset.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And they had their rationalized, but it didn't make sense. So he plucked away at that and chose to leave that group. That's how far it can go.
Wow. So now you already talked about the influence of social work. Are there any other, a cultural, and by culture, I mean any group really, because all groups, we are all the result of the groups around us. We think we're making all these individual choices, and we're like 70 to 90% influenced by everything that's around us. So are there any other groups that you learned about, adopted into your life that became part of the way you are in the world?
Well, again, I had to try all kinds of things to try and survive in the world and develop who I was and find my truth and who is Linda Crockett, right? At the time, it was another name, but anyway. And to be honest, one of my survivals was Al-Anon and the 12 steps of Al-Anon. And Al-Anon is not a religious group, but it's a spiritual group, and everybody can use their own spiritual belief or religion. There's no rule about that. So it got me on a spiritual search. A spiritual search for me was truth, not about finding a God or a power, but more a spiritual truth about who am I and what drives me and what's my truth. And so I have to thank Al-Anon for getting me out of a bad situation and getting me to a plateau where I could do the next step. There's life after Al-Anon, and for me that was college.
Yeah.
That was social work college. And then social work college got me to the next plateau, the bachelor's and then the master's. And it was always been a path of developing and challenging and more. There's got to be more,
Yeah.
and there's got to be better. That's kind of what's led me to the next level and the spiritual journey of truth, which led me to some of my core values now as a mature, woman, that I feel that, okay, I've arrived now. I can tell you what my core values are today.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us your core values since you're on that topic?
Authenticity would have to be number one, and always being true to myself and helping others to be true to themselves. Keeping myself in check. And I think that's a strong leadership skill. I think that's a really powerful leadership skill, to be self-monitoring, to listen to that voice within us. I think, based on what we've shared so far, we both know that there can be a lot of noise in our heads that become self-doubt or second-guessing or confusion or old messages that we need to sift through. And we can't always trust what's coming from this head here. So it's so important for us to be mindful and slow down and quiet and listen to the truth that really sits within inside us. So after months and months and months of being psychologically attacked in the workplace, all I would have left is to ask my inner core self, which for me is at my heart, it's different for everyone. Am I a bad person or am I a good person? And I knew unshakably that I was a good person. Have I tried to do anything wrong today? No, I haven't. I've worked my hardest. That's my core truth. No abuser could ever shatter that. So I had to quieten my mind and I had to listen and hear. And I think leadership today, if you're not confident as a leader, you need to listen here as to what's in your way of being confident, and you need to face it and deal with it and correct it so you can be confident. Is there any self-doubt? Check here. Staff or leadership, that is something that is really, really important to me. My guiding mantra is, am I walking my talk?
Mm-hmm.
Am I practicing what I preach? And I can honestly say not every day, and it's a lifetime process. Trying my best, that's the first step. That's one of my core principles or values. Humanness is the other. Not placing myself with such high expectations I can never meet them. With such high expectation, I'll never feel good enough. I'll never feel like I've accomplished. I'm 5'2". I'm never going to be 6 foot. So it's good to have high standards, be my best 5'2", but I've got to stop looking at the 6 foot mark. I'm never going to get there. Put high heels on, but that's temporary. So I think that being human is about accepting that I'm not perfect.
One of the things that you're talking about is basically the adult ego is based on, am I a good person and am I a competent person? So trying your best is, am I competent? And am I a good person? What's the proof that I'm good? Mm-hmm. Without those two things, you just feel that you have nothing to offer to the world. But we all are good and competent people. Like you mentioned before, if we don't go inside and find that inner core, that inner strength, and stand within that strength, we are just battered about in the winds of difficulties. And it's very hard to feel that you're a good and competent person when you're being bullied at work, because it's a constant affront of who you thought you were, right? So I think that when you're able to go back inside yourself and say, no, I'm not the way they say I am. I am a good and competent person, and move forward. That was really important. And I just want to backtrack one little bit too, because what you mentioned Al-Anon. I know what Al-Anon is, but there may be some listeners that haven't heard what it is. Can you explain what Al-Anon is so that we can just make sure that everybody knows what you're referring to?
I think most of us have heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's being a 12-step program, and Al-Anon is for the spouses and the adult family members of the alcoholics. So it's a support system, it's a very similar process to Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's a support system and a guide for people who are impacted by their loved one who's drinking or taking drugs.
Yes.
So it's another 12-step program that is not led by a professional. It's all driven by members. So if it's all right, I want to add to what you just said.
Sure. Please go ahead.
So I'm going to go to two perspectives. As a leader, we all make mistakes. We're not perfect. And if we can accept that and learn from that and change our ways, that's great. But like you said, if you're working with a bully and you make a mistake, which again is human, but if you make a mistake, which you will, they will attack that mistake and they will repeat it and drive you into the ground with it. That's one of the tactics that bullies use. So there's a complicated part here. I'm going to accept that I'm human and I accept that I make mistakes. But then I'm also going to be terrified of making a mistake. I have that even happen to me today, or in this profession that I'm in, that I'll still make a mistake and people will try to attack me with that. On a healing side, I want people to learn from their mistakes and do better so that they won't stay trapped in shame or regret or incompetency and make decisions with guilt and shame. That makes us poor leaders. That makes us poor parents. So I think we have an obligation to ourselves to heal that part of who we are and remove the guilt. We don't want to carry a knapsack of guilt and lead with that. We need to clean our house, and then we need to just move forward with the learning that we have and the new skills that we've developed.
Yes.
The other part of my values is collaboration. I can't tell you how important that is to me. Collaboration, not competition, which we see a lot in our world today. Sharing and learning from each other. And it's so important to put our egos aside and understand that we all have limits and see the gifts that each of us bring and bring that together as a group to change things that sometimes are impossible, right? Mm-hmm. Like I want to focus on the possibilities of the issue of workplace bullying or harassment. It takes a team of skills to resolve these complex cases. And there's plenty of work out there for everybody if we could just collaborate, accept our limitations, and see our gifts and work together. I believe that healthy collaboration helps us do our best and could really move mountains and save billions of dollars each year.
I so agree with you. I totally agree with you. Working together with people is important, and putting the ego aside, I think, is necessary. People don't realize how necessary it is, because when the ego takes dominance in the way that we perceive things, it distorts reality. You can't see anything for what it is, because you're distorted. It's distorted by looking through the multiple self-serving layers of ego.
Yeah.
Let's go to that other, the next one, which is your temperament. Temperament's what you're born with. You're just, when the time you're a baby, you're going, oh yes, this is a very thoughtful child, or this is a child who, is very passionate. I think people know these things. So what would be the temperament? And then what have you learned that's become part of who you are? That's your personality, that's, you added that on as you grew. Temperament, something that stands out, and personality, something that stands out.
That's a difficult question because there's so many parts, to look at. The part about me being a naive social worker, coming from an idealist kind of perspective, really influenced the first half of my career. And there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears throughout the last 32 years of my career because of balancing naivety with hope and at the same time reality in the political world that we live in. And the limitations of being in a bureaucratic organization, for example, with all the different personalities and skill sets, and levels of authenticity, and levels of deceit, right? So you're in this, I felt like a dolphin swimming with sharks a lot of the times. And I'm not saying that I was too sensitive. I must say that I had to learn how to set some really strong boundaries, understand and accept who I am. And I want to be a sensitive person because that makes me creative and innovative, and problem solving and authentic, etc. But I also had to build some very strong boundaries and develop a realistic perspective of the world and be more diplomatic, have more emotional intelligence in my communication, identify my own feelings before I could help somebody else, and identify my strengths and weaknesses. And where I needed to go. So my temperament is a sensitive person, and I think a very genuine, caring, kind, sharing person needed to develop some security and sense of protection and boundary setting and awareness of my limitations. At the same time, not give too much and burn myself out.
That is an amazing answer, Linda. That it shows that you have a really deep self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you don't get to that point of being able to articulate what you just explained now without having thought carefully about where you come from, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what context you're in, how you can adapt to it. It's great.
And I have to say, Marie, that research shows, as well as my hands-on experience working with thousands of employees, which I'll validate the research by observing it and working with it. These are common denominators in a lot of the employees I work with.
Yes.
Thinking that and having to learn these skills of having boundaries, of healthy workplace practices. Work-life balance is so essential. It's not just a new phrase that we throw out there. It's not just temporary
Well, self-care, self-awareness, and the development of resilience doesn't happen if you just don't think it doesn't matter.
That's right. You can't
Right.
just shelve that part.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's important. I'll do it later.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do. And we have to take it so seriously because we live in a world of higher stress, do more with less. Yes, there's competition. And we, for that reason, have to turn on those skills of self-care and know that's our survival. So, sleep is so essential. Eating right, exercise, drinking water, breathing properly. This isn't just stuff you put on the shelf and say, okay, I'll do it later. This is survival now. If you don't want to end up with a gastrointestinal, cardiac issue, or migraines, or back pain, or body pain, muscle pain, and our immune system being attacked, we have to take this very seriously.
You talked about creativity before. And if you think about sort of the beginning of the human race evolving and having to create tools and stuff like that, people didn't create ugly tools. People didn't create tools that were, this is good enough. They created beautiful tools that would last their whole life. Part of the sense that you can survive is the fact that you can create something. And you mentioned creativity a few times. So I just sort of wanted to throw that in there because that really sparked that idea when you mentioned it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what avenue that took me down. The word creativity to me was, again, that self-care in a sense of, what do I love to do? Do I love to walk in nature? Do I love to paint? Do I love to sing? Do I love to write poetry? You stop doing that when you're stressed out. That is your survival, because all that stress becomes like blocked energy in your body and in your brain, and you can't process and flow like you normally would. In other words, your full capacity is not on board when you're stressed and you're blocked. So if you paint, then paint, because it will release some of that energy. It will release the blockages, and then your creative comes back on board. Mm-hmm. And your capacity to think and with clarity and process decision making and next steps, that comes back on board. So that's what comes to mind when you say that word. Get back to your painting, your running, your singing, whatever it is you do, so that you can release what's blocking you.
Mm-hmm. And it can also be something like, for example, my father-in-law, it's fixing a motor or creating a motor. I had a coaching client where he wanted so badly to create a system that was going to be a new product for their company. And he was so blocked emotionally and from the whole issues that he was facing that he couldn't do it. And as soon as he said, I'm just going to get started on this system, everything opened up for him because he was creating something that mattered to him.
And as you said, when you're creating, you actually start to meditate, which is a form of breathing and calming and grounding. And all of a sudden, the blockages get torn down. And that could be grooming your dog. That could be playing your guitar. That could be woodwork, whatever's right for you to get you into that state of meditation.
Mm-hmm. So I'm really enjoying all the insights that you're bringing to this, Linda. I know that there's one you started to talk about, time when you were in the younger member of the family from Scotland who didn't fit in the family and you didn't fit in the Canadian society, and you were trying to figure out who you were in all this, which is the typical, what they call third culture child syndrome, where people become very good at building bridges, but they feel rootless. And so I'd say that was an experience of cultural disconnect, where you felt, this is normal for me, not normal for you. Where do I belong? So can you think of another incident where you felt really disconnect? Could it even have been that sense of being naive and idealistic, and then running across like a client who had a reality that you couldn't even imagine would be that horrible, and you thought you were prepared for it? It could be that too. Like, I'm just sort of fishing around for ideas here, but can you think of a time when you felt that what you lived and what your reality was kind of in dissonance with some other reality, and there was kind of a clash there?
I would probably have to say in my work as a social worker, to be honest, in the 22 years mark that I'm talking about, where I was, I guess, in social work, you could do anything from handing out bus tickets right up to jumping out of airplanes. So, I mean, there's quite a wide range. And in the 22 years as a child abuse investigator, or an addictions counselor, or working in poverty, there were so many limitations. For example, I had 450 employable males that I had to manage in this short time. And then I had 350 families, so double that at least. It was impossible to be truly who I was as a social worker. I became that broker, and I was so limited. I couldn't do social work. So I struggled in that 22 years in that time limit, resource limit, voice limit. I never fit in the 22 years. I went from job to job to job, tried another degree, to finally find where I would fit. because I was actually trying to do real social work. So I didn't fit.
Yeah.
I would get disciplined because I would use up too much time, or I would work too hard, or I'd do too much. I actually got disciplined in my last job because I was doing too much as a social worker for a family who had lost a loved one due to cancer. So I realized that I wasn't fitting in there, and I needed to look at where did I fit in. It was actually in doing clinical social work. I needed to do the full meal deal where you really assisted people from start to end on all the layers. That was a cultural shift for me, I guess you could say, in my profession.
It is, yeah. That's a great example. So we're reaching the end of the interview, and I wanted to ask you about you've had some pretty bad experiences with employers. If you were being employed and you were going to give advice to that employer on how to make things really work well for you, what would you tell that employer?
So if I'm in a situation where, I think you'll have to reword that for me again.
Yeah,
Maybe.
let me try this again. So let's say, and somebody says, Linda, you are the person we want for this job. We've handpicked you for this. And we want to make the work environment as conducive to success as possible. And so what should we know about you that's going to help us do that?
I'm trying to translate that in my position that I'm in right now, or are they hiring me as a contractor, or are they hiring me as an employee? I think my answer might be the same, that I need to know that you have policies and procedures that are going to be aligned with the current Occupational Health and Safety Act, that will protect me or protect your staff against any harm. That's the law, and I need to know that you have that. That's the expectation of the law, that you have it, and I need to know. I would also say that I need you to give me the opportunity to train your staff and train your leadership. That's law, but it's also important. And leadership and staff, in my opinion, should be trained separately, because staff will not speak if you, as a leader, are in the room. And if you want valid information fed back to you, let me train your staff. I'm not reporting on anybody that speaks to me. I will share themes and patterns. So let's get everybody on the same page. And I would say it's so important for me to know that your leadership team is cohesive, that you have everyone on board with following these new procedures and following the policies, because it's just a piece of paper if you don't, but also now you're breaking the law. So I need to know that that's on board. Everyone's on the same page. All new hires will be trained as well. And I need to know that we will always keep this as an open topic, that we will talk about it, we will share about it, we will have yearly, maybe a workplace bullying awareness week, which I celebrate in October. I have posters if people want posters to put up. I need to know that's what we're going to start off. And if there's any person who's harmed right now or who's acting out with bullying behaviors, that we give them resources. There are resources available for bystanders, for targets, for those who are perpetrating on other people, that we have resources for everyone, that we're not shaming bystanders, we're not shaming perpetrators. We need to help them change and heal.
That's a perfect segue into the next question, which is, what do you want to promote? Tell us about something you'd like to promote.
Well, again, it is Workplace Bullying Awareness Week in October. I get a proclamation from our mayor every year. I joined the Workplace Bullying Institute in the USA with their week. I'm hoping that we can share that Canada-wide, and then we can make it worldwide. We take this seriously. Workplace Bullying Awareness Week is about putting up posters. It's about taking training. It's about watching our videos, looking at handouts for your employees, and it just keeps the subject alive. And I'm always doing training. I'm doing training for leadership. I'm doing training for staff. We have myself and Pat Ferris in Calgary. We're both specialists in this area. We're therapists who treat employees, but we're also training therapists. I think that's an exciting change, that we can finally announce that and travel the world and train therapists on how to properly treat people who have suffered the betrayal of workplace bullying, and also work with those who are offending so that we can create long-term sustainable change, right? We offer consultations and needs assessments to employers, and we're here at a phone call or a Skype call away. It doesn't matter where you are. I'm going out to Innovate now, and different areas throughout Canada and the US. So we're happy to share and offer assistance to any organization or individual.
That's great. I'm going to put all that contact information and links into the show notes so that people can connect with you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
At the end of the day, with all the work that I have done, my message to the people that I teach whether they're leaders or not, staff, is that your greatest tool is self-insight, is self-monitoring, is being aware. How am I coming across? What am I speaking? How am I reacting? What does she or he bring up in me? What do I need to look at? Self-monitoring, self-development. You can't change someone else. You have the greatest power is right here, inside. Looking at what is my leadership skill? What is my leadership strength? Where do I sort of drop the ball? Am I the laissez-faire style, which is a high risk factor for bullying in the workplace? Or am I the authoritarian style, which is another high risk? Or am I leading with emotional intelligence? That's going to be your gift to offer the world today, to be self-insightful.
And those high-risk styles are learned behaviors that can be unlearned or changed or transformed. But it takes willingness to look inside yourself and say there's something so much bigger and greater inside that I'm just not even accessing. Instead of saying I have to have the control over this, it's look at all this wealth of resources that I have inside me that could be put to use in ways where I do not have to create this kind of an environment.
I love what you just said. So I want to build on that too, that we need to be listening to people like Brene Brown. She's got some really great messages about being strong as a vulnerable person and being true to ourselves. There's really great messages in Brene Brown's work for men and women. And that the self-insight is about having the strength to be honest with yourself and understanding where can I enhance. Your greatest confidence is in healing some of those wounds that you have, so that a bully or a person, any kind of abuser, cannot come over to you and start pushing those buttons in you, because they know exactly where your buttons are. And we all have a story. We all have a history. So if we can self-examine, where do I feel I have some wounds? Is it that I don't feel good enough? Does it feel like I'm not strong enough, not smart enough? Then I need to look at those wounds and I need to heal that so that he or she can't poke that button in me again. And I can stand strong. Even in my failures and in my mistakes, I can still stand strong, not to be afraid of vulnerability.
That's a great message to end on, to not be afraid of vulnerability, because that's where your strength is. That's lovely. Linda, thank you so much for this beautiful interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Turning trauma into transformation. That is what Linda Crockett's professional journey is all about. From the difficulties of negotiating identity and hope within her newly immigrated Scottish family, to working with the most difficult social work cases in Alberta, Linda has consistently been on a self-discovery balancing act. On this delicate tightrope, her naturally kind and sensitive nature has come up against a need to protect from the harsh realities of dysfunction, addiction, and violence. After recovering from her own workplace bullying experiences, Linda retrained as a trauma therapist and crafted the Alberta Bullying Research, Resources, and Recovery Centre. If you loved this insightful interview, you can hear her live during the webinar she will be presenting for Shift Management on October 16th. Check out the shiftworkplace.com website in upcoming webinars to find the registration link. It will be well worth your time to participate. Should you be listening after October 16th, look for the recording under the Past Webinars tab. Same website, shiftworkplace.com. Thanks for helping us spread the word about the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, on our Work and Culture Facebook page, or send me an email about the episodes that personally touch you. Go to marie@shiftworkplace.com to send that message. Thanks for listening, and may cultural connections continue to broaden, deepen, and inspire your world.